Hi everyone and welcome to another tactical analysis video. Given the recent news that the baby-faced assassin that is Ole Gunnar Solskjaer is going to take over from Jose Mourinho at Manchester United as interim manager until the end of the season, I've decided to take a quick look at how his second place finishing Molde side played this season in Norway. We'll then take a quick peek at how he might look to translate similar principles into the current Manchester United side, within the limited time he has to, of course, leave his mark on the leftovers of Mourinho's squad. Whilst the season is over in Norway and Molde apparently plan on eventually having their manager back, it makes you wonder whether or not the full-time job could actually be on the line for Solskjaer if the Norwegian manages to revive United's season and almost miraculously achieve a top 4 finish come the end of the season. One of the biggest problems for Manchester United fans in recent years is the lack of attacking, direct, high-tempo football at the club since the departure of Sir Alex Ferguson. And the good news is that early signs certainly suggest that if the Norwegian can get the Red Devils playing like his Molde side, those days could very well stand a chance of returning sooner rather than later. So as we can see, while Solskjaer is better remembered for, well, not really doing a great job during a very, very tough time as Cardiff City manager, where you can argue that certain external factors, like changing the colour of your home shirt, probably played a part in that, where there was a significant disconnection between the fans and the team. Solskjaer really has had the mass majority of his success managing in Norway. He won the 2011 and 2012 Tippeligaen titles. Bear in mind the Tippeligaen and the Eliteserien are the same league. I guess the name probably changed due to sponsorship. And he's finished second in the Norwegian top flight in 2017 and this season very recently in 2018 as well. But in general, he has a 55.6% win percentage at Molde, and it's easy to see why the Norwegian club can't wait to have him back from Man United. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer has mainly deployed a 4-2-3-1 or 4-3-3 with his current Molde side, with the occasional sprinkle of a 3-4-3 and outright 4-4-2 on rare occasion. Generally, the formations are versatile, and it isn't unusual to see one become the other throughout the length of a game, depending on the requirements of a match and the off-the-ball movement of certain players. In line with his vigorous rotation policy, Solskjaer sets his Molde team to play with an aggressive attacking mentality that is eager to win the ball back high up the field and willing to sacrifice defensive stability for goals and the creation of goal-scoring opportunities. While many have suggested we could have another Guardiola on our hands in terms of unpredictable rotation, given Manchester United's current injury problems in areas and Solskjaer openly admitting that over-rotation was a factor that led to his poor managerial run at Cardiff City, the chances we'll see something similarly vigorous in the long run during his short stay at Manchester United is probably slim, at least until they can no longer make the top 4. The reason he is known for his rotation policy in Norway is probably down to his stubbornness to play a high-pressing brand of football with players who aren't as physically fit as your average Premier League footballer, particularly Man United players who are used to playing European games as well throughout the course of a season. However, this is not necessarily a bad thing for Manchester United fans, given the available energy in their squad that belongs to players such as Marcus Rashford and Jesse Lingard. Generally, regardless of shape, the traditional attacking wide players, depending on personnel, will often be more as inside forwards or second strikers than outright wingers or width-based players, with the option of cutting inside on occasion, as United fans will have seen a lot under Mourinho. These players can be pacey strikers such as Pavel Sibicki, who's currently playing for Molde on loan from Leeds, who despite playing mainly as the left wide attacking player, says playing as a striker is his favourite position and it's a position that he played at previous teams in the past as well. However, due to the qualities that he has, he's a very pacey customer, not an out-and-out physical striker, and therefore he fits into this kind of half-space exploiting role. Think of the roles as Mohamed Salah and Sadio Mane in Klopp's high-pressing 4-3-3, particularly last season. And I mentioned last season because obviously Salah nowadays is really playing more as an out-and-out striker with Coutinho playing off him, but we don't want to talk about Liverpool for now. And, well, to be honest, I'm not a Man United fan, but to be fair, Man United fans watching this are probably sick and tired of hearing about Liverpool, right? So I'll stop now. But yeah, think of, again, Liverpool last season, and think of the approach as 3 strikers rather than a striker and 2 traditional wingers, with the attacking width being heavily reliant on the use of attacking wing-backs. Midfielders, wide attackers, but really just extra strikers who look to exploit the half spaces. Bear in mind that this approach doesn't always translate into a right footer on the left and vice versa at Molde, and most likely won't at Man United at all times depending on personnel. However, the emphasis to take into account is their narrowness, and once Molde reach the opposition half, and the attacking movement of the overlapping fullbacks who provide width and crosses into the box when comparing directly to Mourinho's approach, which often saw fullbacks and central midfield players put on more of a leash in relation to getting forward or picking their opportunities wisely. This limited their attacking potential in favour of defensive stability and lower risk taking. And really, we tend to see the exact opposite from Solskjaer's sides, and it's something Molde are known for in the Norwegian league, where they have this kind of mentality where if you put one past us, well, we're going to keep throwing players forward, even our fullbacks, to put 2 past you and still take all 3 points. After all, Solskjaer himself, as we all know, was a striker and is all about scoring goals. Regardless of the specific spread of the 3 central midfielders, one always tends to be a ball winner, or deeper anchor defensively minded player who focuses more on shielding the centre-backs, whilst one is a more adventurous runner from deep alongside Ekram, who is the key technical playmaker for the side. Both Matic and Fred would rotate this role well, potentially. It should be noted that whilst both non-defensive oriented central midfielders had a licence to roam and get in the box as they pleased to, of course, accommodate a lot of incoming crosses, if a goal was needed or the team were chasing points, it wasn't unusual to see the more defensive midfielder join in too. The offensive mentality attributed towards these central players obviously means Molde themselves are less susceptible as a result on the counter-attack, but it is certainly closer to the United way of playing than Mourinho's central midfielders, who always had to prioritise stability and sitting deep and team shape over taking risks to potentially support Lukaku in the box and score more goals. Ekram was often the number 10 in the 4-2-3-1, or the most creative and technically gifted of the midfielders, alongside a more energetic box-to-box-esque type player, whose role would sometimes result in sitting a little bit more deeper depending on the opposition, depending whether you're playing at home, depending whether you're playing away from home. Due to the emphasis on direct play and diagonal balls from Solskjaer's side to get the ball forward, the understanding between wide striker and attacking fullback was equally as important as the corresponding teammates on the opposite side of the pitch, with their movement off the ball to get into the danger areas to accommodate incoming crosses to the box. The understanding on the green side here is crucial, as when a direct ball is played to one side of the park and an overload is created, the wide striker who drifts out wide can rely on pivoting around his fullback to help him play out of trouble, around the opposition defence, and then create a goal scoring opportunity. Simple stuff if you're familiar with the modern game, but also not physically possible if the fullback isn't willing to always make themselves available far up the pitch, and obviously as a result leave yourself open defensively. And if the rest of the team doesn't move to accommodate this and provide balance within the side to allow the more offensive approach, you're going to struggle. In this case, an example of the types of movement that I'm talking about are not only Hestad and Christopher Remmer getting into the box on the opposite side of the green area where the ball currently is, but also the likes of Ekram moving himself towards the ball as the side's primary central playmaker to create the overload that we spoke about. And whoever is then playing as the more defensive the trio in midfield will then drop deeper to accommodate Molde's defensive line, which as a result then allows potentially the other central midfielder that's remaining to also get himself into the box because he's achieved that kind of defensive stability regardless. Failure for the rest of the team's off-the-ball movement to accommodate these overloads out wide, which are a key part to any form of direct football that relies heavily on getting the ball wide and playing a crossing game, can leave teams extremely exposed defensively, particularly in the wide areas. In truth, what has been discussed here isn't necessarily specific to Solskjaer's Molde side, but it's an example of where United under Mourinho lacked, playing a similar shaped system where, while the shape was similar, the mentality of the fullbacks, their hesitance to give up defensive stability on both sides in this scenario, along with the midfielders to support a direct transition from defence to attack and get into the box, would often result in players such as Rashford, Martial and co crossing the ball into a lone Lukaku versus a fullback crossing the ball into an opposition area so flooded with attacking players in true Alex Ferguson United fashion that even the opposite fullback at times is there at the back post ready to tap it in. Football is more than just formations, and a lot of people don't realise that. Player roles and mentality is crucial, and for me, ultimately, that was a significant part of the downfall of Mourinho at Manchester United. And of course, where the concept of Mourinho's bus came from. Under one manager, a 4-5-1 or a 4-2-3-1 or a 4-4-1-1 can be incredibly defensive, and under a completely different manager, it can be one of the most offensive formations at one's disposal. One of United's key problems this season has been their inability to keep clean sheets, often due to a lack of organisation and consistency in defence, which is really unusual for a Jose Mourinho side. After their laboured 2-1 win away at Bournemouth in November, where they were dreadful by the way, Mourinho claimed the reason they'd struggled to keep clean sheets so far this season at that point was because they're actually trying to play more offensively this season, even though to many that may be hard to believe. However, part of the problem for many is United's lack of strategy in terms of winning the ball back. Unlike many top teams who look to exploit their physical advantages in the Premier League, for example, all the bigger teams play a high-pressing game such as City, Liverpool, Spurs and even Arsenal, United's immediate press often comes to an end very, very quickly, and they prefer under Mourinho to defend deep and stand off opponents with wide wingers who have tracked back and willing to track deep to protect their fullback. The problem is that football has evolved, sports science has evolved to allow the production of fitter players and more technically gifted players. As a result, mid-table or lower table Premier League teams nowadays can actually play football. We see teams as low as the Championship or even League One playing football on the ground and playing patient, possession-oriented forms of football. Lower skilled teams find it less alien and closer to their actual comfort zone, playing through and around teams that defend deep, let them have the ball and stand them off, as opposed to teams with incredibly high pressing that play at a very high tempo. This is why only the top teams tend to play vigorous high pressing play styles, and why the idea of it more than often sheds fear into the minds of most opponents. This isn't to say that a more conservative approach can't still yield success. Of course it can. We saw it under Ranieri at Leicester. Even though, again, you can argue that football's evolved a lot since, a few years ago when Leicester won the league. However, as with every system, you need the right types of players and players with the right mentality and commitment towards playing in that style. I can go into more detail on this, but I won't, as it isn't really relevant towards the main aim of this video. But anyways, Solskjaer tends to employ a high-pressing zonal game, with the occasional bits of focusing on individual man marking, depending on the opposition. But this applies to most teams that apply a high pressing zonal game, even though we probably won't see as much man oriented pressing or marking as we did under Mourinho, who used to love trying to mark, for example, Hazard, important opposition players out of certain games. Sometimes it would be successful, sometimes it wouldn't, but really Mourinho would always go into games and rather than focus on playing I don't want to sound cliche here, but playing the United way, would focus always first on trying to adapt to prevent opposition weaknesses. And whilst that's worked really well for him in the past, and it's also a reason as to why a lot of his previous players have said that he's a tactical genius and that they've never worked under a manager who pays as much attention tactically to the opposition In this case, it hasn't quite worked out for him. Yeah, going back to Solskjaer employing a high-pressing zonal game, it does eventually drop into a 4-4-1-1/4-4-2 off the ball when needed. But in general, the wide strikers, or the second strikers, always ensure to keep themselves open and not drop too deep to keep themselves available as counter-attacking options. This, believe it or not, can also have a reverse effect on the opposition, because that can then force them to leave men back, such as fullbacks, who then become hesitant to attack themselves. So it isn't always necessarily a risky play. It depends on how your opposition react to, your setup. As with most high-pressing games with many pros come cons. So, for example, it takes time to get used to tweaking a high defensive line and having a pressing-oriented game, as well as requiring the correct personnel to be able to do so. Solskjaer is brave to employ this approach in Norway, and the stats suggest it sometimes is his downfall, as well as the types of goals his Molde side concedes often, but he will always maintain that it's his philosophy and he will stick by it. We saw it with Klopp, again, apologies to mention Liverpool, where he got a lot of stick when, he's been at Liverpool for a while now, because they were conceding a lot of goals. And as we can see over time, they have changed personnel. They are still playing with a high press, a Gegen press, but they are now conceding less goals. So the point is, whilst, we mention that Solskjaer likes a high pressing game, whilst a lot of other people have been saying, oh, this is great now, it finally means United are going to be playing with a high pressing game, you also need to assess the fact that some may argue that United don't have the players, don't have the midfield. I certainly can't imagine a player like Matic playing in a high-pressing system. So the point is really that whilst a lot of people are excited because Solskjaer, plays with this high-pressing game and so on, and high-pressing football is associated with attacking football and exciting football and direct football and fast football, you also need to keep in mind that these types of things don't happen overnight. Solskjaer isn't going to work a miracle overnight. And there are players within the Man United side who really suit being able to do this, like your Rashfords, like your Lingards, but there are also players like your Matiches, like potentially your Herreras or your Matas that don't have the physicality required to play this way. So it's not going to be a miracle overnight. But in general, what I predict we'll see is less adventurous attacking movements from the defensive midfielder, who will slot into the back two, allowing the centre-back to split and allowing Solskjaer's United to make the pitch as wide as possible, similar to what Fernandinho does at Man City with their high line, or a halt on the opposite Man United fullback from taking a risk and going forwards and getting into the opposition box. But I actually think it will be the first option, where we'll see a Fernandinho-esque movement with the more defensive of the three centrally, and we'll see the opposite fullback given the role of always basically making sure he's forward and giving United that extra man in the opposition half, which isn't something they did very often under Mourinho. But in general, this will provide more leeway for the central creative midfielders and attacking fullbacks to join the attack when this Matic or this Fred or this Herrera drops back to support the centre-backs. This doesn't necessarily solve the issue of space to be exploited behind the high line that comes as a byproduct of this high-pressing game. And while I don't think United's current side is strong enough to challenge for a top four spot in the Premier League, mainly based on the personnel at their disposal, they should be able to get away without scoring and playing this type of approach against the majority of average opposition in the Premier League, given their offensive strengths. Because, at least on a personal level, whilst I'm very suspect of United defensively, Mourinho wanted another centre-back. I'm not going to go into the politics of the fact that he signed Lindelof and so on. But really, you can't sit here and compare the likes of Benjamin Mendy, your Kyle Walkers, your Trippiers, and these world-class fullbacks and wing-backs, and then try and convince me that Ashley Young and Valencia are the equivalent of that, relative to fullbacks. Valencia, phenomenal player, especially for his age, but, let's not sit here and compare Valencia to Kyle Walker or Ashley Young to Kyle Walker. And this is why, on a personal level, I think United have a lot of quality going forwards. Rashford's a fantastic player. Martial Very, very good player if you can utilise him correctly. And even someone like Lukaku, whilst his first touch is probably worse than mine, and I'm not even a professional, I'm just kidding. Whilst he has a poor first touch and so on, we know that this guy can deliver. He delivered at West Brom. He delivered at Everton. Dare I say it, he's played much better under Mourinho in previous seasons. So there's definitely potential to be unleashed. And regarding Lukaku, if there's anyone that can unleash Lukaku, it's none other than a striker himself in the form of Solskjaer. But basically, I believe that Man United, despite the cons of this high pressing, high defensive line, which is a contrast to how they played under Mourinho, despite the cons, I actually think that they can still employ it against the majority of average opposition in the Premier League, and then look to accommodate a different approach against the top six to balance out the results. And obviously by top six, I mean when they play Man City next, or when they play Liverpool next, and so on. And then we'll have to wait and see what Solskjaer has up his sleeve. So whilst Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's Molde side have shown traits of playing out the back, goalkeeper rolling it out, passing it out and so on, and retaining possession against weaker opposition at home, or where required tactically, either due to how the opposition play or due to seeing games out when leading, they're also known for their ability to transition quickly and directly into the opposition half. Very Alex Ferguson-esque. In general, with an emphasis on ball-playing defenders, narrow secondary strikers who provide a physical presence either side of a tall, strong centre-forward, cough cough Lukaku, winning second balls is a crucial element to how Molde have played. And it's not really surprising that Solskjaer, being a striker, would look to utilise forward players like this. But the point is that expect United to be capable of basically transitioning quickly, playing efficient, quick, drilled, direct counter-attacking football, but also being able to play out of the back and retain possession where required, which is something they struggled to do under Mourinho. Under Mourinho, a lot of the time, seemed very, very, very reluctant to even pass out of the back, even when they had the lead, where they could assert their own dominance, using the higher quality of players that they had, and more than often it would just be a big punt up to Lukaku, and because of how deep they were, and a lack of support really, because players like Rashford and Martial found themselves in wide areas playing more as wingers. Even players like Mata would sometimes find themselves out on the wing, and with all due respect to Mata, he's phenomenal playing off the central striker, but he just doesn't quite have the pace anymore in wide areas, and we've seen instances, I think it was the first game of the season, where it just did not work out for him. They end up being disconnected from this lone person in Lukaku. So whilst Lukaku's come under a lot of stick, he's not actually had that much support because of how they used to play under Mourinho. Due to the narrow front three and their emphasis on winning second balls, this not only resultantly makes room for the attacking fullbacks to overlap because of the secondary strikers sitting narrower to support Lukaku, potentially, but also it leaves the switch of play on the cards. So in this case with Molde, opposition sides tend to be forced to defend narrow because of the three up front, and deep because of the central physical striker direct ball threat to try and counteract it, and that obviously makes room in the wide areas for the fullbacks to exploit, which in return increases the possibility of being able to play that switch ball and the fullback crossing the ball into the box, which again is something we've seen a lot from the likes of Gary Neville and so on over the years. Erling Braut Haaland, 191 centimetres tall. This guy, is all the craze in Norway. He's soon going to join Red Bull Salzburg. He's only 18. I think he scored something like 12 goals in 21 appearances. Don't quote me on that for Solskjaer. And, you look at some of the other strikers that Solskjaer has also signed or has in his squad. You've got two Nigerians with the two other prominent players, Chukwu and James. Quite strong, players, aerially decent players up front. Not just in their goal-scoring threat, but in their aerial ability and ability to hold up play. And basically, due to the switch of play often being on the cards, due to how Solskjaer's Molde side play, and the license to overload the attacking areas from both central midfielders and fullbacks, using this kind of physical central pivot up front was one of the key elements that allowed them to counter-attack with ease. So really, in terms of how I predict Solskjaer will line up at Man United, there's obviously no doubt that personnel will be heavily rotated, particularly during the heavy as always Christmas period into which he comes into, and that training and performances will obviously define the starting 11. So, if you're looking at this starting lineup right now, I'm not saying that this is who Solskjaer will play with. Obviously, no one can predict unless you're a psychic who Solskjaer will come into the club and this weekend against Cardiff decide to play. I've basically chosen players here relative to how I think they would fit the roles that he employed at Molde. Solskjaer may pull a 3-5-2 out the bag or something ridiculous. I don't know. But I'll explain to you why, I've chosen these players in particular. But in general, to be honest, I actually predict he will stick to the 4-2-3-1, 4-3-3 approach he used at Molde, mainly as it's a shape that the current United squad will have worked on under Mourinho, and because, to be frank, United's personnel perfectly suits the shape. They have plenty of central midfield depth of players who are capable of fitting in the different roles. For example, Pogba has the capabilities to sit deeper and ping passes from deep in a Scholesy type fashion, as well as play as a deeper box-to-box, or as a second striker or number 10 directly behind Lukaku. Now, this is harsh potentially on someone like Lingard, who many would probably associate in that kind of role behind Lukaku, that focal point of the triangle of three in midfield. But again, United are fortunate to have plenty of players who can make this trio of three up. And over the Christmas period, also the element of rotation where Solskjaer will be looking to, give players a chance early on in his reign, we will see different personnel playing. And I think once Sanchez returns from injury in particular, United will have plenty of depth to also supplement the versatile narrow three approach too. Depending on opposition weaknesses, we might even have games where, whilst we talk about having this big, physical, aerially decent focal point up front, there may be certain games where he opts to play Rashford up front, for example. But anyways, under Mourinho, the likes of Martial and Rashford would often find themselves trapped deep, protecting their makeshift fullbacks. Because, come on, let's be honest, the likes of Ashley Young and Valencia can't be compared to your Benjamin Mendy's and your Kyle Walkers. And this would, as a result, leave Lukaku isolated as a single goal threat, and leave both Martial and Rashford playing more outright winger roles that don't suit them when they're really both inside forwards or strikers. And we saw the damage that Martial can do at times this season when he is a little bit more narrower, when he is a little bit closer to goal, when he can cut inside on that right foot. But he can't do that if he's out wide all the time and basically protecting his fullback and sitting deep. And he's not Superman to be able to transition forwards when that direct ball goes forwards towards Lukaku, who probably doesn't even win the direct aerial ball, which is actually something Zlatan Ibrahimovic did very well for them previously. And that's something they've lost, as well as his influence in the dressing room and so on. But in general, I predict kind of like your Rashfords and your Martials will have less responsibility defensively, which is riskier and will probably become more conservative against the top six and stronger opponents. But ironically, as discussed earlier in the video, their presence further up the pitch with a more attacking mentality will affect the cautiousness of the opposition in return and probably work in favour of United. And of course, note that when I say they'll have less responsibility defensively, doesn't mean that they won't contribute defensively, but they won't drop as deep, and their focus will be defending from the front for United because of the pressing game that they'll most likely try and employ, rather than getting drawn back into their own half and not being able to support Lukaku. Martial perfectly suits the role out on the left because he can cut in on his right foot, and Rashford can provide something a little bit different on the opposite side, an injection of pace, another dimension to attacks on the right-hand side. Lukaku will be suited to play with his back to goal in this system, and he'll be less isolated because of the more attacking approach. And under a striker like Solskjaer, I think he will improve. Lukaku, he's received a lot of stick for not being good enough at being an aerial focal point, but he is decent physically with his size and height and has good aerial ability. We've seen that at Everton and West Brom. So more than often, it's not that Lukaku isn't well suited to being a target man, but rather United's inability to support him and pick up second balls due to a lack of hunting and pressing from the front. He's just too isolated. With attacking fullbacks, there'll be an emphasis on getting crosses into the box, not just to a big man like Lukaku, but also to the supporting players around him. An opposite fullback who should all be looking to be risky and surge into the box the United way. On law of averages, United will score more goals this way. The physicality of Pogba as well, if he plays in the number 10 position off Lukaku rather than in the deeper position, will also help him push forward, get forward more, get into the box and bulldoze opposition defences when crosses come into the box. A good one that comes into mind is his goal at the Etihad against Man City last season. And Pogba played well for France in the summer, and while France kind of played a system where Pogba sat centrally just off Griezmann, N'Golo Kante's defensive efforts often allowed Pogba to surge forward and play make or shoot from the edge of the box. And this was accommodated by a player like Matuidi, especially in the final against Croatia, despite playing wider to the left, also providing an extra bit of stability and support to Kante when Pogba would decide to surge forward. And it links back to the partnerships that we spoke about earlier on and the rest of the team's ability to reposition based on certain important players' movements within the team. And if United can get this balance centrally midfield right, where you don't have three traffic cones or I don't know, whatever you want to call them, that just aren't willing to make runs forwards and, you know, essentially leave your defence exposed at times, which ultimately is something United just didn't do when it was something they needed to do, even sometimes when trying to get a win or chasing a lead. Pogba can actually become an attacking threat if he gets that freedom to get forward, and he might actually start paying back his price tag. And Lingard, I think, will be a really important squad player, even though he's not on the screen, and I predict due to his recent form this season, especially recently scoring against Liverpool Anfield in Mourinho's final match before getting sacked, of course, because of his versatility. And it means that he can obviously fit in one of these central roles as well as one of the secondary striker roles. Now, defensively, De Gea hasn't become a poor goalkeeper overnight. He's still, without a shadow of a doubt, the world's best. Smalling's currently out injured, and Phil Jones is, well, Phil Jones. You know, as a Blackburn fan, I've got no idea how on earth we milked United £25 million for him. He's phenomenal when he played for us, but something's gone wrong for him at United, and doesn't look like it's going to be changing anytime soon. The reason why I've gone with Rojo in this case, because he's very similar to Foreign of Molde in regards to that. He might not be the biggest or the most aerially strong, but he's very strong technically to be a ball-playing defender, which is the types of defenders that Solskjaer utilises. I don't want to go into detail what a ball-playing defender is, but you know, if you know what a ball-playing defender is, it's obvious why I'm talking about ball-playing defenders with what we've spoken about previously. And physically as well, Rojo, you know, he's quite fast, he's quite mobile. And that allows him to cope with this high pressing game and high line a little bit better than someone like, you know, a Phil Jones, for example. He's also left-footed, like Foreign. You know, when you play with two ball-playing defenders, most of the time, you know, in order to be able to kind of have a little bit of decent variation coming from defenders who, you know, aren't Pirlo by any means when it comes to passing the ball forwards, which is why the likes of ball-playing defenders like your Stones and so on are so rare to come by. Being left-footed on that left side of defence helps give you a bit of variation and helps give you that extra bit of quality. And it's why, actually, Laporte, of course, you know, if you play fantasy football and you want to play a player from Man City in your defence, you play Laporte because Laporte is their only left-footed out-and-out centre-back. That's why Otamendi is always getting rotated with Stones, whilst Laporte is the most nailed, if you see where I'm coming from, because he is their only left-footed centre-back. But anyways, I also expect Lindelof to get game time and possibly get the nod over Rojo due to his Nordic roots. Seems a bit stupid, but hear me out. And ability to play on the left side of defence whilst he's right-footed. But ultimately, there's going to be plenty of rotation over Christmas regardless, right? And with emphasis being on both central defenders being ball-playing defenders, Bailly is, of course, obviously the top choice to fill in on the right-hand side. And Solskjaer's already said that, you know, everyone is going to start with a clean slate. And this is regardless of the fact that Mourinho didn't get on with Bailly. But then again, Mourinho probably wake up in the mirror, and you could probably see that in his face at times, look in the mirror and argue with himself whilst he was managing Man United, let alone argue with some of his players. And it's no lie that, you know, him and Bailly may not have gotten along towards the end. And at the end of the day, if you go to the media and say, oh, my centre-backs are rubbish and I want a new centre-back and they won't give me a new centre-back, how do you expect your centre-backs to feel? But yeah, Bailly does bring certain unique elements to the backline that Rojo and Lindelof can't, for example, that maybe someone like a Smalling does bring, which is that height, that physicality, and so on. But anyways, Luke Shaw being left-footed, and in my opinion, the best left-back at the club, despite Young getting a lot of plaudits in the past, being versatile in terms that he can use his right and left foot. For me, Shaw, we've seen glimpses of it this season. When he's fit, when he's, feeling it, his attacking capabilities are second to none in terms of finding United's best attacking wing back. And him being able to be that asset in the wide area for Solskjaer is exactly what he's looking for. As for right back, I've seen a lot of people suggest that Dalot's going to keep his place in the side. Now, this is a bit of a controversial opinion, but I honestly think towards the end of Mourinho's reign, now, I mean, I've only watched limited games of this guy, and I think he's got a lot of potential. And ultimately, it's a bit mean to single him out because all of Man United are a bit crap, but I think they've got better options, but people also argue that it's about time that youth get involved. It's the only way that he will improve. And whilst players like Valencia and Young might play better in the right back role, how's Dalot not going to improve if he's not playing first team football? But I think, controversially, that really the only reason why Dalot was starting was because Jose just lost the dressing room. So which player can I get on my side and can I reward with sticking in the starting lineup? Or is this young Portuguese kid that probably adores me? I still think Valencia, despite his age, is still quality, and physically for his age is still second to none. And I think, United are going out and attacking, just stick him on the right wing, get him whipping balls into the box. We know he can do it. But yeah, a lot of United fans on social media also seem to be expecting loads of youngsters to immediately enter the starting 11 overnight because of Solskjaer's previous success at United, obviously managing the reserve side. And I don't know, kind of expecting that. I don't know, I feel like a lot of people are suddenly expecting Alex Ferguson with curly hair to apparently be in charge. But anyways, I think with United's current run of fixtures against the likes of Cardiff, Huddersfield and so on, and them looking to chase a top 4 finish, I think Solskjaer will actually give everyone a clean slate like he said, and actually try and field his fittest and strongest side. I think once it becomes evident that a top 4 finish isn't possible, that's when we'll see your Chongs, your Gomez's, your McTominays, your Greenwoods and whoever actually make their full debuts once there's, nothing to lose. But until then, I expect them to appear, kind of make camo substitute appearances, which is still a step in the right direction towards the United way, given Mourinho's anti-youth policy, but I don't expect them to kind of replace Man United's top players overnight. But yeah, in scenarios where United regain possession, the most notable difference I predict will be quite simply the number of players that will have a license to rush forwards and join the attack and overload the opposition box. It'll mainly be a mental change, a mentality change, rather than any sort of, miraculous tactical change. I mean, it's difficult for a full manager, going into an average club to be able to make changes quickly. Like, I envy the Hussein Hattel, I think is how you pronounce his name, going into a club in the relegation zone. I think they were before he beat Arsenal, and trying to make changes to the system there. These things take time. Mourinho's had a whole pre-season with his United side, Don't expect miracles overnight. Ultimately, Solskjaer has nothing to lose. He's been purposely brought in as a club legend to keep the fans happy, and most importantly, probably see if he can put the United back in Manchester, by bringing Phelan back and giving it that kind of United feel. Now, fortunately, he probably will try and bring back the United philosophy that fans have been starved of for years. But the truth is, anything on top of a top 6 finish is a bonus. And again, I don't think people should expect miracles overnight, because it just isn't going to happen. So even though we spent a lot of time talking tactics, really, I don't feel like there is actually that much that is going to change, relative to shape and personnel. It's all going to be mentality. You're going from a manager that's telling you to aim for the clean sheet. And trust me, with someone like Mourinho, who broke records with Chelsea in terms of keeping clean sheets and having the least goals conceded. I think it was in the season where he won the Premier League first time round with Chelsea, and being a defensively minded manager, to suddenly leaking goals left, right and centre. Like, deep down, that will be hurting him. And it's no surprise why they'd end up going into more games with the core aim of trying to keep a clean sheet, because it's this idea that managers like that have, which isn't necessarily incorrect, that if you don't concede, you can't lose. But that's a very, very different mentality in the effect that it has when rubbing off on players versus going into a game and saying, don't matter if we concede one, we'll outscore them. It has its effect on players, and I think Solskjaer will promote a more attacking mentality. And whether you agree with it or not, ultimately it's the United way. Expect a higher defensive line, a higher press, higher tempo all round. And at times, risking having wingers track back less. Fullbacks and central midfielders will have more freedom under Solskjaer to press and join attacks at the expense of defensive stability, which is something that held back these attacking players under Mourinho. I think the biggest change over time will be United's strategy to win the ball back. So I believe the change of the attacking mentality is a part of, like I said, playing with this high defensive line, getting in the face of the opposition, playing with this fast pressing tempo that United haven't really done in recent years. You can't play that way without instigating a more attacking mentality on players. And that, I think, if you're like kind of someone who watched United, for example, against Liverpool, where they conceded, 32 or 36 attempts on goal, and then went to bed and woke up, let's say around March or April time, and watched Solskjaer's United, I think that would be the biggest change you would notice. And that would lead to the more attacking approach. So really think Liverpool, think Spurs, think Man City, and how they press and how they win the ball back high up the pitch and compress the space the opposition have to work with in their own half through the high line. And I expect Pogba to be pushed more forward to help Lukaku win aerial battles as a second striker due to the physicality that he has. That's what my gut feeling tells me. I don't think we're going to see Pogba held back and playing in more of a deep role. I really don't. I think he's wasted there, and I think it's a reason as to why a lot of people say, look at him strutting around centrally, because he doesn't do that. He didn't do that for Juventus. He certainly didn't do it for France in the World Cup. I think he was one of their better players in the World Cup. So it was quite clear that he was given certain instructions by Mourinho to play a certain way and, prioritise defensive stability through his lack of movement forwards. Solskjaer has experimented with 3 at the back formations before, and it makes sense given his tactical emphasis on playing with 3 narrow strikers and a lot of width coming from attacking wing backs, and it could be an option once Sanchez comes back, but I don't think we'll see it happen. But ultimately, like I said, don't expect huge tactical changes mid-season. Expect mainly a change in mentality that will come through this higher pressing game that will lead to more goals. And to finish off, I think after everything we've discussed, there are still going to be people out there that are going to be wondering, well, United haven't necessarily struggled to score goals this season. They've struggled to defend. So how on earth are these small tweaks and changes that are more attacking going to help United defensively? And I think if you're a United fan, the quote, "The way to win battles, wars and games is by attacking and overrunning the opposite side" by Sir Alex Ferguson should be something you keep in the back of your mind, whether or not you agree with it. But yeah, let's leave it at that. But as always, it's been a bit of a long video. Let's be honest, most of our videos end up pretty damn long anyways. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, hit the like button. Let me know how you think Ole Gunnar Solskjaer will do in the comments below. And of course, hit that subscribe button. And as always, thanks for watching.